On the outskirts of a sleepy village nestled between rolling hills, a curious phenomenon had begun to unfold. It started with the barking, a persistent, rhythmic barking from a dog that no one seemed to own. At first, villagers paid little attention. After all, dogs barked all the time, didn't they? But this was different. This was constant, and it was coming from a particular spot in the village's sprawling forest, just beyond the town's edge. The tree stood there alone, towering above the others, its ancient branches twisting and turning like the knotted fingers of an old man. Its bark was dark and rough, its leaves a mixture of green and gold, even in the height of summer. This tree was known by many names. Some called it the elder oak, others the whispering tree, but to those who lived nearby, it was simply that old tree. Most villagers kept their distance. They had heard the old tales, stories passed down through generations of a tree that was not just a tree. According to legend, it was a gateway to other worlds, a protector of the forest, and sometimes, just sometimes, a prison. Whatever the truth was, people didn't go near it. It was better that way. But now a dog had decided to change that. Every morning at dawn, the dog appeared. A large, scruffy creature with matted fur and eyes as bright as the stars. It was a dog without a name, but everyone called it the Barker. The dog would stand at the base of the old tree, staring up at it with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. And then it began. Bark, 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 loud, insistent, and unyielding. The dog's voice echoed through the woods, filling the air with an energy that made the leaves tremble. It didn't stop. For hours, sometimes for the entire day, the dog barked at the tree, as if trying to communicate with it. At first, it was a curiosity. Villagers would stop and watch, wondering what the dog was so upset about. But as the days passed, their amusement turned to concern. The dog never seemed to tire. It didn't eat, it didn't rest, it only barked. That tree's cursed, old Mr. Wren said one evening at the village tavern. It's been there since the beginning, and those who meddle with it end up with nothing but bad luck. But the dog, said Mary, the tavern keeper, isn't cursed. It looks desperate, like it's trying to warn us. The townspeople were divided. Some believed it was simply a dog with a strange obsession. Others, like Mary, thought it was trying to tell them something. Chapter 2. The Child in the Tree. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a small child named Thomas wandered into the forest. He was no older than 7, with wild brown hair and a sense of adventure that seemed to run in his blood. His mother had told him to stay away from the old tree, as had everyone else, but Thomas was not one to follow rules if they didn't make sense to him. So he snuck out. The moment he stepped into the woods, he could hear the dog. It was barking, but not the usual, endless rhythm. There was something more frantic about it now, as if the dog was afraid. Thomas quickened his pace, drawn by the sound. As he rounded a bend, there it was, the old tree. The dog stood before it, barking furiously, its tail wagging wildly as if beckoning him closer. Thomas hesitated, but then something caught his eye. A small shape, no, a shadow, moved among the roots of the tree. He knelt down, trying to see better, and found it. A small, ancient door, no bigger than the size of a rabbit's hole, embedded in the tree's thick bark. It was almost invisible against the grain of the tree's surface, but it was there, unmistakable. The dog stopped barking. It looked at Thomas with knowing eyes, as though it had been waiting for him all along. Without a word, the dog turned and trotted away, leaving Thomas alone with the mysterious door. Chapter 3. The secret of the door. That night, Thomas could not sleep. His mind kept racing back to the tree and the door he had found. What was it? Why had the dog stopped barking when he arrived? And most importantly, what was behind that door? The next day he returned. This time he wasn't alone. He had told his best friend, Lila, about what he had seen, and now she was just as curious as he was. Together, they ventured back into the forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. When they reached the old tree, they found the dog waiting for them, as if it had been expecting them all along. The dog didn't bark this time. Instead, it stood silently, watching them with its intense gaze. "Do you think it's safe?" Lila whispered, her eyes darting around nervously. Thomas nodded, though he wasn't sure himself. He had to know. Together, they approached the tree, and Thomas reached out to touch the door. It felt strangely warm beneath his fingers, as though it were alive. Slowly, carefully, he pushed it open. A rush of wind greeted them from the other side, and the forest around them seemed to blur, shifting as if it were made of mist. They stepped through the doorway and found themselves in a place unlike anything they had ever seen. The sky above was dark, but stars shone brightly, more than they had ever seen in the real world. The ground beneath them was soft and mossy, and the trees around them were tall and twisted, their branches intertwined in a way that made the forest seem both ancient and alive. In the distance, they could hear the sound of water, and the air smelled like wildflowers. "Where are we?" Lila breathed, awe in her voice. "I don't know," Thomas whispered, looking around, "but I think we're inside the tree. This is what the dog was barking about." As they walked deeper into the mysterious world, they saw shapes moving in the shadows, strange, luminous creatures that glided through the air like wisps of smoke. Some of them resembled animals, others were entirely foreign, with glowing eyes and bodies made of light. But none of them seemed hostile. They just watched the children, curious, as though they were part of the landscape. And then, deep within the heart of this strange realm, they found the source of the dog's bark. A great stone altar stood in the center of a wide clearing. Above it, suspended in the air by invisible threads, was an enormous crystal, glowing with an otherworldly light. The crystal pulsed rhythmically, as if it were alive, its light flickering in time with the beating of a heart. The dog was there too, sitting at the foot of the altar, its head tilted upward, watching the crystal with unblinking eyes. Chapter 4. The truth behind the barking. As Thomas and Lila approached, the dog finally spoke. Not with a bark, but with a voice, deep and resonant. "You should not have come here," the dog said, its voice echoing through the clearing. "This place is not for humans." Thomas stepped back, startled. "You can talk?" The dog nodded solemnly. "I have been here for centuries, guarding this place. I am the protector of the tree, the guardian of the secret. The crystal is the heart of this world. It keeps the balance between your world and ours. But it is dying." Lila gasped. "Dying? How?" The dog's eyes darkened. "The crystal feeds on the life force of the forest. As the forest weakens, so does the crystal. And now the balance is tipping. If the crystal dies, this world will be lost. And so will yours." Thomas looked at the dog, his heart racing. "Is there anything we can do?" The dog lowered its head. "There's one way. You must find the source of the corruption, the thing that is poisoning the forest. If you can stop it, the crystal will be saved. But beware, the path is dangerous." And with that, the dog fell silent, turning its gaze back to the crystal. "Give me 10 prompts from the script. I want to create AI images."